he's just a few weeks into the job, and Thursday's autumn statement could already be career-defining for the new Chancellor. Well, Jeremy Hunt has been on the show already this morning. He's repeatedly told us that there will be eye-wateringly difficult decisions made on spending cuts and tax rises. With the UK likely already in recession, we spoke to Jeremy Hunt about his plans for the economy. Before we get to the autumn statement, how will you be reflecting this Remembrance Sunday?
Well, I'm going to be remembering my father, who died 8 years ago and was in the Navy all his life. And I'll be thinking about him. But also, I think all of us will be thinking about the brave Ukrainians who have been on the front line fighting for freedom, not just for them, but actually for all of us. And I think it's a reminder that we can never be complacent if we want to defend the things we really believe in.
Is defence spending something that you're going to be prioritising next week, then?
It's really important. I will be talking about it. There are lots of things we need to resolve when it comes to defence spending. But if you're asking, is the Prime Minister, am I committed to making sure that we can defend our country and the values we believe in? Absolutely, yes.
Now, I do want to talk about what we can expect next week. And I want to do things a bit differently, because I know, obviously, with these interviews, you're very limited in what you can say. So rather than just running through a whole load of potential policies and you saying to me, I can't talk about them, I'm going to try and keep things a bit more broad. And if you could answer things as fully as you're able, given, obviously, the concern that so many of our viewers are, frankly, having at the minute with the inflation costs and potential austerity to come as well. You've warned of decisions of eye-watering difficulty. Does this mean we are going to be seeing a return to austerity?
Well, they are going to be very difficult decisions, but we are a resilient country and we've faced much bigger challenges, frankly, in our history. And we know that to deal with problems, you have to face into them, not run away from them. And we're also a compassionate country. And so the plan that I outlined to the House of Commons on Thursday will be one that gets us through these difficult times, but also shows that British compassion, the support for the most vulnerable people, and probably the single thing that is the biggest worry to people on low incomes, actually to everyone, is the rising cost of bills, energy prices going up. And so we will outline a plan to hold down the rises in energy prices and chart our way to a longer-term world in which we're not dependent on what Putin does. He can't just suddenly see our gas prices shoot up. Having that long-term plan in place is, I think, the way that we can give people confidence that we'll get through this. So
will there be a new plan on energy? Because you're warning, aren't you, in the Sunday Times today about the sustainability of the current plan and the amount it's costing us.
Well, we face a global energy crisis. The increase in our national energy bill over the last couple of years is about £140 billion. It's like the economy supporting an entire second NHS. And if we're going to tackle that and deal with the worry that, for example, a pensioner has about the massive increase in the gas bill, the electricity bill, and so on, then we need a long-term plan for the country for clean energy, for green energy, for cheap energy that isn't affected by international events. So absolutely, I'll be setting out that plan on Thursday.
You talk about pensioners. Is it likely that support could be more targeted to people who are more vulnerable?
Well, we want to support people who need support. We don't want anyone not to be able to afford to heat their home over this winter or indeed future winters. But in the long run, what you need is a plan that means that we don't need to have to give very, very expensive support as taxpayers, because we've got an energy system that works better, that deals with what dictators are doing in other parts of the world. It means that we're not suddenly vulnerable to big changes in international gas prices. So I want to outline the short-term support that we'll give people who need it, but also a long-term plan to really change our approach to energy.
Now, there's been reports of a £55 billion black hole in the public finances that you want to try and shrink with a mixture of sort of tax rises and spending cuts. Is that correct?
Well, we do have to do some tax rises, do some spending cuts, if we're going to show that we're a country that pays our way. And the reason for that is very simple. We were able to help businesses through the furlough scheme. We've been able to help people with their energy bills this winter. We'll be able to do so next winter because we've been responsible with public finances. We're now in a situation where the world has changed very dramatically over the last year. But the plan that we'll outline will help us get through this in a way that I want to make sure that this recession, if we're in a recession, is as short and shallow as possible and get through to the economy growing healthily the other side. And that's the plan that I think will give people confidence, and that's what I want to announce to the House of Commons.
You say that you've been responsible with the public finances. I just want to question if that's actually true. I think we can look at debt over time, debt levels, and obviously I take your point that I'm sure you'll say that COVID has come along and that has affected things. But actually the increase in debt started before that. You can see here, it's starting to go up from around 2008 to 2009, and government debt as a percentage of the economy has been high for some time. Some people will be saying, hang on, the Conservatives have been in power for 12 years. You're the ones who have actually effectively trashed the economy and got it into the state we're in now.
Well, we've had some very big shocks, as you mentioned, a once-in-a-century pandemic, now the situation in Ukraine. And you'll find all countries all over the world have seen their debt levels increase. In fact, our debt level is lower than many other countries, many other big countries across the world. But the question is not the absolute level of debt so much as whether you have a plan to bring it down responsibly over time so that people can see, just as families have to make sure that in the end they can pay their bills. They don't just max out on their credit card without having any way of repaying those debts. It's just the same for countries. And we have to do that because if we want to put more money into the NHS, if we want to help people who are going to find it very, very difficult this winter, then we need to have the resources to do that. And that means that we need to take difficult decisions even at moments like this.
You've said that all government departments will have to find more efficiencies than planned. So is that true of every department?
Well, a strong public services, which we all want, need a strong economy. So you have to take difficult decisions. But it's also true that a strong economy needs good public services. We need, for example, the NHS to help people get back to work. So we'll approach this in a balanced way that makes sure that we do everything we can to keep the recession, if we're in one, as short as possible and get the economy growing as quickly as we can.
You mentioned the NHS there. I just want to have a look at the latest figures for A&E waiting times, because this really is pretty stark. This is the number of people waiting more than 12 hours in A&E in England. 43,000, I should say, 792 in October. I mean, frankly, this doesn't look like a health service that can find efficiency savings. This looks like a health service that, is on the brink of collapse.
There are massive pressures in the NHS. Obviously, it's something I know very well from previous jobs I've done. And I think that doctors, nurses on the front line are frankly under unbearable pressure. So I do recognise the picture you say. It's also true that there is a lot of money going to the NHS, and they will be the first to say that in a context where funding for the NHS is going up, we need to do everything we can to find efficiencies. But if you're saying to me the NHS is in a very, very tricky situation, I agree. And I care passionately about the NHS. I've spent more time thinking about the NHS than any other public service in my time in Parliament. And we need the NHS to help us get out of the economic difficulties we're in because, as you'll see in other parts of the Sunday papers, we've got a big increase in the number of people who aren't working, aren't taking part in work, even though they perhaps could. And sometimes that's as a result of long-term sickness. So the NHS is part of the solution as well as facing some very big problems.
So you're going to look at that specifically to try and, I guess, look at the benefit systems, try and encourage people back to work who you believe could be working more?
We need to look at all public services to make sure that they're doing the right thing for the economy. We need to take these difficult decisions, but we need a balanced plan. And what I want to announce to the country on Thursday is not just the difficult decisions, but also to show the way through. And part of that is to show that by tackling inflation early, dealing with these bills that are soaring for families up and down the country, we can get back to growing the economy healthily so that we can invest the kind of sums that we all want to in our public services.
You talked at the beginning about compassion, and you've also said that those with the broadest shoulders should be asked to bear the greatest burden. How do you define people with the broadest shoulders?
Well, I think we have to recognise that people on the very lowest incomes only have so much they can give. We will be asking everyone for sacrifices, but I think in a fair society, as we are in the UK, we need to recognise that there's only so much you can ask from people on the very lowest incomes. So that will be reflected in the decisions that I take, and I think that's important because Britain is a decent country, a fair country, a compassionate country, and I want that to be reflected in the decisions we take.
So you'll be paying a bit more tax then after next week?
Well, we're all going to be paying a bit more tax, I'm afraid, Sophie. But it's not just going to be bad news. I think what people recognise is that if you want to give people confidence about the future, you have to be honest about the present and you have to have a plan. And this will be a plan to help bring down inflation, help control high energy prices, and also get our way back to growing healthily, which is what we need so much.
Do those with the broadest shoulders include public sector workers who are likely to be seeing real terms cuts to their pay at a time when inflation is at 10%?
Well, I'm very conscious of the concerns, for example, of nurses who are considering industrial action at the moment. And if you listen to what nurses' leaders say, their concern is about the impact of inflation on their pay packet. And the point I would make, Conservatives know that a thriving, dynamic economy needs low taxes and sound money. But sound money has to come first, because if you're a nurse, it's inflation that is eroding the spending power in your pay packet. It's meaning that your weekly shop is becoming much more expensive. It's meaning that mortgages are more expensive than they were. And so we need to do something that shows public sector workers, just as we show everyone, that we're getting back to a low inflation economy where they don't have to worry about bills getting higher and higher.
Do you agree with the Health Secretary that nurses are asking for too much?
Well, I think we have to recognise a difficult truth that if we gave everyone inflation-proof pay rises, inflation would stay. We wouldn't bring down inflation. And that's why, I'm not pretending there aren't some difficult decisions. But what I want to say to nurses, to everyone, is that the way through this is to bring down inflation as quickly as possible, because that is the root cause of your concern, your anger, your frustration, that your pay isn't going as far as it might have.
You talk about difficult decisions and everyone being impacted, but I just wonder if that's true, because, according to reports, the triple lock on pensions will be protected. So pensions will be going up by 10% linked to inflation. Do nurses have broader shoulders than, wealthy retirees spending time on the golf course?
Well, I think these are the questions you should ask me after I announce what the decisions are next week. But I would say that there is a lot of pensioner poverty, a lot of pensioners in very...
But the triple lock's not means tested, though, is it?
Well, very often pensioners need help, and it's not necessarily people on the very lowest incomes. But I think you have to wait for the decisions and then we'll see. But I think what you'll see overall is a broad approach that recognises that where we can, we need to prioritise people on the lowest incomes.
OK. Now, as you've acknowledged, we are most likely already in a recession. You're, of course, proposing to cut spending and raise taxes, two things that can have a negative impact on growth. I just want to listen to Ian Duncan-Smith. This is what he told our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, this week.
If they try and hammer us too hard with tax rises, they will actually drive us deeper into recession, thus countering the right objective. And, by the way, any deficit they think is there, and by the way, these are just forecasts, would actually grow, not shrink. So they actually defeat the objective, which is what John Maynard Keynes told us many years ago: you don't raise taxes during the course of a recession.
He's worried that you could be driving us deeper into recession. Is he right?
Well, I have a great deal of respect for Ian Duncan-Smith, and he illustrates with some very important points the very finely balanced decision we have to make, because he's absolutely right. You don't want to do things that make any recession that you may be in worse. But on the other hand, if you do nothing, if you don't show that we're going to bring our debt down over time, we've seen what happened before with the mini budget that happened. Interest rates get higher and you get a recession that's made worse because people suddenly find the cost of their mortgages has shot through the roof. Businesses find that the cost of their loans have become much more expensive. So you need to chart a balance course that is doing the right thing to make sure that the recession that we have, by the way, the predicted fall in German GDP is much greater than the fall here. So this isn't something that's just us. Inflation is higher in Germany, in Italy as well. So all countries are facing these challenges. But if you're saying to me, do I want to act in a way that makes this recession, if we're in it, as short and shallow as possible? Absolutely. He's
not the only Conservative MP who will be concerned about, growth and about low taxes. I just want to play you a part of our interview that we did when you were running to be a Conservative leader back in July. I mean, it feels like a lifetime ago, but it was only a few months. This is a message that you were giving then.
We are where we are, and I think the priority now is to go for growth for the economy. But I also think no Conservative should raise taxes. So the cuts I'll make, they're not particularly retail. I'm also someone who thinks that we shouldn't just stop the corporation tax rises. I think we should cut them so that they're the lowest in Europe and North America. I want to cut it to 15%, the lowest we're allowed to cut it to according to international agreements.
Cutting taxes, going for growth. What happened to that guy?
Well, he's sitting right in front of you, Sophie. And look, overall point I was making is something that I hope you'll see reflected in the decisions made on Thursday, which is to try and protect the things that really matter for economic growth. But the world has changed since the summer. We've had a very big deterioration in public finances, in the international situation.
So Rishi Sunak, to be fair, was, during that leadership campaign, describing as prioritising growth over inflation as fantasy economics.
Well, and he deserves great credit for that, because he said things like that people didn't want to hear. He lost the Conservative leadership campaign, and I think subsequent events have proved that he is absolutely right in the judgments that he made at that time. But what I would say is the Jeremy Hunt you saw there saying, let's be the most competitive place for businesses anywhere in Europe, is the same Jeremy Hunt that is now Chancellor of the Exchequer, and we need to absolutely protect the things that matter for our long-term growth.
Just finally, you mentioned Rishi Sunak there. Of course, he used to do your job, Chancellor. I'm just interested to know what it is like, putting together a big fiscal event like this with your boss, the guy who used to be Chancellor. Is it a bit like having someone, looking over your shoulder, marking your homework for you?
It's a great relief, actually, Sophie, because I've got someone who knows all the things you can do that might go wrong, all the mistakes you might make inadvertently. So we have exactly the same approach on the big issues. We need to do what's right for long-term growth. We need to be prepared to take difficult decisions if necessary, but we want to protect the vulnerable. But in terms of the detail, this is someone who's done my job extremely well, and that's a great support.
OK, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.